right, so while we've been focusing on the flooding in KwaZulu-Natal today, it's also important to remember a disaster which has almost been playing out in slow motion right in front of our eyes. It was a year ago today that the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital had what was seen as a relatively small fire near the parking lot. The hospital was evacuated. Since then, major parts of the hospital have not been reopened, despite promises from the Gauteng Health Department that they would be. Time and time again, these promises have been broken. Today, 365 full days later, a full calendar year after this fire, the casualty section of the hospital is still closed. In fact, 30% of the hospital of Charlotte Maxeke Hospital in Joburg is still closed. Professor Martin Smith is the head of surgery at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, a hospital which has had to deal with so many of the patients who cannot go to Charlotte Maxeke. Professor Smith, good afternoon to you. How difficult is the situation that you're facing at the moment?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yeah, it's interesting because over a year's period of time, things start to feel like they're normal. And in fact, the new normal is not really what we think we should be experiencing. So yes, there are areas in our hospital that are, again, overwhelmed and overloaded because of the closure or the ongoing closure, particularly of the Casualty and Emergency Department at Charlotte Maxeke Hospital. So it is still a problem, and it is still being felt at Chris Hani, it's still being felt at Helen Joseph, it's still being felt by all the surrounding hospitals in the region.
I mean, when you have a casualty section, now your hospital is a massive hospital. It's a huge campus. We know how important it is. But, I mean, it's all important for the system to work together. Charlotte Maxeke is supposed to deal with, the casualty section in that section in Joburg. You're supposed to deal with, what happens in your section in Joburg, and Soweto and Joburg South. In a way, you haven't necessarily got, Charlotte Maxeke's resources to deal with Charlotte Maxeke's patients.
No, in general not. I mean, in some areas, for example, in our trauma department, the Charlotte Maxeke trauma department still continues to contribute to the load, to the service load of the doctors. And I stress the doctors because it's not the nurses, it's not the radiographers, it's not other areas. So they do contribute to what we're doing. But you're absolutely right. It is all about the system, and it's about how the system functions and how the system's organized. And when an important component of that system breaks down, then the chaos and the knock-on effects on all the other hospitals become really difficult to manage. We've all got, it's not only human resources, it's just physical infrastructure and space and access to operating theaters, access to ICU beds. So the system has to work in sync, and if it's not in sync, then the knock-on effects become cumulative, and not just, we have more patients. It's much more than that.
You've been very frustrated, I mean, I think correctly and completely understandably, at the problems facing your hospital. You don't have enough workers. There were some more workers for COVID-19. They've been taken away now. Do you find it quite difficult to treat people at peak times?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one has to acknowledge the remarkable work done by the whole group of health professionals in the hospital. Who've really worked hard to make sure that they can do the best that they can do. But I think that those who manage the systems, the authorities, the administrators, particularly those outside the hospital, have not been really as cooperative and as reactive to the situation or responsive to the situation. And I think that that's where a lot of frustration has come from, is that while the hospital does its best, the availability of resources is not easily achieved. And that's the challenge that we face. And as you say, that's the source of much of the frustration.
When you have fewer resources to treat people, so when a major hospital's casualty section is closed for so long and everyone else is put under pressure, and I made the point that this in some ways is a disaster in slow motion, do you think it leads to some people losing their lives because they don't get the treatment that they would have gotten otherwise?
I think there's no doubt about that. I mean, when you have, even before the fire and even before COVID, we had a resource-constrained health environment. And when the stresses like COVID and the fire, there is no doubt that people lose their lives. And they lose it in insidious ways. They lose it through, as what you call, slow motion. cancer patients not getting access to treatment. And so, while they don't die today, they may die in 6 months rather than have been cured. People with infections, instead of coming to the hospital, within 24 hours, come in 72 hours. And so the outcome would be worse than if they presented early. So the impact isn't always as dramatic as it was sort of initially when the fire was there and the beds were closed. So I have no doubt that there is an impact on lives. And I think that this remains a humanitarian disaster. I mean, it's strange to be talking about humanitarian disasters now when what's going on in UKZN. But I think that that's the nature of our society. We become numb to these things. There is still a humanitarian crisis in Gauteng based on the closure of the hospital and the non-availability of beds.
I have to say, like everyone outside the Gauteng Provincial Health Department, I still don't understand why part of the hospital is still closed. It makes me want to bang my head on this desk, frankly. I imagine you may well have the same reaction. At this stage, do you yet know why it's still closed?
I have absolutely no idea, and when from a university's point of view, we have close relations with everyone who works there. And the frustration that the staff at Charlotte Maxeke is actually experiencing at the moment is even bigger because they just can't understand. Things like parking, things like areas that are closed, availability of, they just don't understand why. And I think that every day there's a new story. So I think that no, I don't know what the root cause is. I just don't understand it. At one stage we thought it was the fact that the city of Johannesburg was refusing fire certificates, and we couldn't understand that because we said, they had to come and look at Chris Hani Baragwanath Academic Hospital. They'll never give us fire clearances because we don't have any of these things that they're demanding that Charlotte should now have. But then when that passes over, it becomes contractors, it becomes theft, it becomes corruption, it becomes all those things come together to create this completely chaotic situation. So no, I can't answer why.
The current promise, and I say that, and I'm afraid to be, and I'm sorry to be so cynical, but I think I must. The current promise is that the hospital's casualty unit will open in April, at the end of April. Well, we're on the 16th of April now. I seem to remember a press release saying it would open at the end of March. Do you believe it will reopen at the end of April? It will have a big impact on you if it did.
Well, I remember when it was going to open on the 16th of December. 16th of December is typically the most busy day in our trauma department's calendar. And so we expected it to open, in the middle of December. Then it was going to be the end of January. Then it was the end of February. Now it's the end of April. So I don't know if any of us really believe. I think we wait to see it really happen before we believe that it's happening. So we continue to make contingency plans. We continue to function as if it's not going to open. And then when it does open, I suppose we'll have to go to a plan B. But until that happens, we have to still continue to work as if it's not going to open because these promises have been broken too many times now.
Professor Martin Smith, thank you. Head of surgery at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. You can imagine the impact. A major hospital, casualty units of Charlotte Maxeke closed, and the impact that it has on Chris Hani, Helen Joseph Hospital, all of those hospitals around that area now. 365 days since that fire.